Hello there, my name is Corey Pitzer. I am the CEO and founder of SafeMap. We specialize in safety transformation in organizations. And as a result of that focus, we're looking at the science of change. Now this video is a bit of an in-depth look into what it takes to manage change of culture. And it is designed to cater for people, organizations, who want to conduct these analysis and who want to embark on a change process and want more in-depth information. So let's have a look. Safety culture and the change of it. Let's start with a very simple and almost too simple model of an organization. You'll see there that at the source level, at the highest level of the organization, we see the values, beliefs, trust, symbols, vision, and so on. The way that is set up in an organization, I call that the mindset of the organization. That translates into how we give incentives, how we make decisions, how we measure performance and appraise it, give information, and so on. This is the planning side of the organization. Now that translates into a variety of processes, human and organizational performance processes. How do we train people? How do we measure that? How do we plan tasks? And how do supervisors actually execute those? These are all the aspects of human performance, and especially the area of discipline and reviewing performance. Now this in turn translates into the exposure of people in terms of their behavior to the risk situations they find themselves in. So this is where procedures and rules play, and where we execute the work and where work pressures come to a focal point. Now most of the time, this gives us control, this gives us output, this gives us results. And only rarely do we see injury and incidents. Now how do we deal with this in a normal business? At this level, we want to prevent injuries. And this is typically how we've always done safety management, to prevent injury. More in the 80s and 90s, in the early 2000s, we started to see a focus on behavior-based safety. And it was all about people's behavior and human error and people making mistakes. More recently, we're starting to realize that human behavior is a consequence, is a symptom of the processes in the organization. And those processes are in fact a consequence of the systems in the organization. Now, in its turn, we are now looking at culture or the mindset in the organization and how that affects the whole organization. It is only more recently that this kind of analysis is taking precedence in organizations. And this is, if you think about a medical model, this is the level where we do ECGs. This is the level where we do an in-depth study and analysis of the heartbeat in the heart of the organization, as against just listening to the heartbeat with a stethoscope on the pulse of the organization. So this is a very significant shift in focus, in complexity, and in sophistication in measurement. What are the key metrics of culture? They are the strength of the culture, the type of culture we have, the alignment in the culture, and the maturity of the culture. Now these are all very important aspects of culture. I'm going to show you how we actually measure these in the SafeMap process. First of all, let's look at strength. This is probably the most important metric in a culture analysis. And I use the analogy of glue in the organization. How strong is the glue that keep people's perceptions and actions and behaviors together? Now, if you look at the model I showed you of an organization, the very linear one, our safety culture model overlays that. At the upstream level of the organization, on the left, you can see people's perceptions of the organization, of leadership, and of processes. In the center, we have people's perceptions about risk influences, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And a variety of attitudes has an impact and influence on the rules and task scales and how people see that in the organization. So how does our survey work? So our survey has 92 statements, and these are positive and negative statements for each of the 46 factors, and they are randomly organized in the questionnaire. Now let's have a look at just one example: commitment to safety in the organization. The two statements are: the company is serious about safety, and the company doesn't care much about safety. These two statements are scattered somewhere in our survey, and people simply respond to how they feel about those statements. And I'll talk about how we do this. But let me show you how we gather information. So on the statement, we would gather the information from various groups. Group A, B, C, D, and E could be job levels, it could be different departments, but we would record the responses of people to the positive statement. And let's say that's the range of responses. You can clearly see Group A and D are much more positive than Group B and E. We also collect the information about the responses to the negative statements. And if that's the case in Group C and D, you can see that this is clearly a more positive group. In Group B, you can see that 30% respond to the positive, 60% to the negative, and that gives us a significantly more negative grouping. And you can also get this. More than 100% of people responded, so 20% of people responded to both statements. This is an indication of ambiguity. And if, in the case of Group E, only 40% of the people responded to either one of the statements and 60% to neither, that is an indication of more neutrality. So you can see we actually get a lot of information out of this technique of measurement. Now, how do we calculate the net positive response? We subtract the negative from the positive in each of those groups, and in Group C, we'll get a plus 50 net positive result. And if we do that to all the other groups, you can see that this is our net positive or net negative result. Now we add to this the benchmark. Now the benchmark is a very important way of measuring the strength of this glue. The benchmark comes from our database. I'll show you in a moment what it looks like. But we simply measure the difference between your group's responses and those of equivalent groups in the benchmark. And that'll give us an indication of responses above and below that benchmark response levels. And if it goes over a certain level, in this case 20%, we consider that as an acute difference, either more positive or more negative. Now this is important. This is our benchmarking. We have an enormous database of organizations around the world in all industries. And we can compare the organization against the average responses of all those over 300 companies. Or we can only compare you with the top quartile organizations. Or in an ambitious organization, we can compare you to our top company benchmark. And this will give you a different level of comparison each time. Here is just one example of how we measure perceptions about discipline. Employees are treated with fairness if they have an accident or injury. High responses. Employees are not always treated fairly if they have an accident or injury. And you can see that there's higher responses at the covered or operational level. And if you do the NPR subtraction, you get a range of groups responding more positive than industry and one group significantly less positive. Now, across our 46 factors, we can display the information for each factor to the extent it deviates from that of the benchmark. This gives you an enormous amount of information, and this tells you everything about the strength of the culture in the organization, the relative strength and the absolute strength. The next indicator is the type of culture. Now, the types of culture have been defined by James Reason originally. You would remember him as the Swiss cheese developer. Professor Reason defined the various types of safety culture as an informed culture, a just culture, a reporting culture, a flexible, and a learning culture. And we've incorporated the research of various other people like Professor Decker, Professor Holnagel, Elliot Jacques, and Peter Senge into our model and to identify just what would be those types of cultures. We have added a trusting culture and a caring culture as the more foundational level of culture. You can't have an informed, just reporting or flexible and learning culture if you don't have a trusting and a caring culture. So what do? Out of our model of 46 factors, we have identified which factors relate to trusting and caring, and they make up those measurements. Informed culture, we have various factors from our model doing that. The just culture, reporting culture, and each of these types of culture we can relate back to factors in our model, and we then come and calculate that for the organization to have a precise indication of what is those types of culture in the organization, and we give you a quantitative look at that, and you understand very clearly that is the benchmark in the blue outer ring of the spider graph, and this organization, APC company, is the orange, and they can clearly see on which aspects deviate most significantly. The next one is the alignment of culture. This is a very important aspect. This is to what extent is there consistency or congruence between various job levels in the responses. So let's say you have the 46 factors and the operators responded in terms of the NPR at those varying levels to each one of those 46 factors. And that makes up a certain pattern. Let's say the supervisors, the frontline leaders, had a similar response pattern, slightly deviating here and there. That gives us, if you calculate this with the correlation coefficient, about 55% congruency. Let's say the managers in the organization look like that, and you can see that there's a very low level of congruency, maybe 25% in this case. And an ideal organization would have high levels of congruency. Now, if you have a look at our database, you can see the table in green is our top company benchmark. And you can see that overall, they are consistently responding in the same pattern to the extent of 81%. Now, in this APC company's case, only 52%. So almost 30% less congruent than top companies. And you can clearly see that in a specific case there, senior managers and the operator level are deviating significantly from each other's response patterns. This tells us the hierarchical strength of the organization's culture, the extent to which we know one level influence positively or not so positively the next level. Maturity is a very recent focus in safety. Now, one of the more well-known models is that of the Bradley curve that showed 4 levels of maturity. And then there's models of Hudson and Westrom. And we have adapted from all of those models our definition of maturity, ranging from a reactive level right through to a righteous, reliable, and resilient level. Now, this is what we call system 1, 2, and 3. And if you have a look at this in the organization's maturity, you can see that it goes beyond the Bradley curve. And we have a variety of statements that we scatter through our survey that measures perceptions of a high maturity and a low maturity. One example, leadership. In a low mature organization, they will focus on safety because they have pressures from above. In a high mature organization, they will focus on safety because they genuinely care about people. And in this case, each of these have a low and high maturity statement, and we have an algorithm that can calculate this and shows on our scales where the organization lies. Top companies lies at the resilient level, average industry around about there at the responsible level, and this particular company at a rational level. Now, everything comes together in a range of key indicators. And these we have developed over many years now to identify what are the critical factors to change in the organization. And number 1, do employees see safety as a commitment for the company? And there's a range of factors measuring that. Number 2, is there trust between employees and their leadership? Number 3, is the response to failure viewed as constructive? Does risk transparency exist in the company? Are safe behaviors evident in the company? Is the impact of the team environment positive? Are behaviors positively reinforced? Are employees feeling engaged? Are risks seen as effectively controlled? Is the impact of formal safety practices effective? Are stresses on employees contained? And are decisions accepted throughout the organization's levels? These 12 questions make up the design of change in the organization, and I'll explain later how that works. Our whole report that we put together for the organization revolves around these 12 questions, and number 13, how does it compare to the benchmark industry? And you have precise data to tell you exactly how you differ in each of these factors. Now, we've looked at what culture means, what we analyze. But there's a very important point that is missed by most organizations that provide services in this field. And it is about the methodology of measuring culture. It is not that simple to just put together a questionnaire and then measure people's responses and opinions to that and put it together as a culture survey. It isn't. Because there's a big difference between opinions and perceptions. Perceptions are where the culture resides, not in opinions. We have to have absolutely an assurance of anonymity and confidentiality for people. Most of the surveys that you'll get today cannot guarantee this. The moment the person receives a questionnaire and has to complete it and write up their job levels and job titles, etc., you lose that and people start to respond adversely. It affects the reliability and validity because there are numerous psychometric biases. I'm going to explain to you what is the difference between culture and systems in an organization. And I'm going to do this with the aid of a character by the name of Daryl. Daryl is a carpet layer, and he has been given a job, a very important job, to lay the carpets for the mayor of the town. And it is very important that he does the job quickly because on Saturday night at 5 o'clock, a party for their little princess will start. And I'm giving you this information to show you what kind of pressures now exist on Daryl. In a formal sense, what does Daryl do? Daryl puts together the policy statement, he pulls it out, he ticks the boxes, and he starts the job, and now things are getting done. Now just watch closely what happens with Daryl as he finishes this job. Now, at this moment in time, there is an important distinction. Daryl now has to make a decision, and that decision is intuitive. He's got to make it in a split second. She is on her way to step into that place and look at it, and if you can think of the consequences of this, Daryl promised her he would finish the job, and now there's his cigarettes underneath the carpet. Daryl will never work him down again. And you know what Daryl should do. Everybody knows he should lift up the carpet and fix the job up. But you do know what Daryl will do. Intuitively, he's going to make sure that this job is saved.
This looks great. This must be yours. I found it on the kitchen table.
Thanks.
Mommy, have you seen my hamster?
Well, isn't he asleep in its cage?
Have you seen my hamster then?
No.
Tony, go upstairs and look thoroughly. I mean, sure. Probably behind the bed, like where you found him last time.
Okay.
Now that's a terrible outcome for Daryl. And you can only sympathize with him. He tried to do his best. But it's not over yet. He's now watching this red spot on the carpet, which is the hamster. What should Daryl do now? Well, we all know what he should do and what he will do. What he should do is he should actually call in this little girl and tell her that her beautiful little hamster is actually now dead. Do you think that is an outcome for him? Do you think it's even possible for him to do that? Imagine the consequences. So what will Daryl do? Daryl will quickly cut that carpet open, take away the evidence, fix it up, and no one will ever know. The hamster just disappeared. This is culture. If this is the driving force in people's minds in an organization, that drives behavior, that is culture. Now, if you do a survey in an organization and you have a questionnaire, and this is a very typical one, and you have so-called Likert scales, 1 to 5, and each time they have to strongly disagree or strongly agree, you are creating a measurement methodology here that is completely inappropriate for a cultural analysis, because you are not measuring the right things. First of all, in Daryl's case, when he started off his job and you gave him this questionnaire, what do you think he would have answered? He would have answered what is socially desirable. And people have a natural tendency to figure out what is the right answer, the correct answer, the desired answer, and they respond in terms of that. It's a very common problem in cultural surveys. It's a very common problem in surveys. The next one is the so-called agreement bias. Some people tend to strongly agree with statements. The extreme responding bias is other people tend to strongly disagree with statements. And the central tendency shows people wanting to respond down the middle, not to upset either side. And then there's error responding. It is actually remarkable how many people find statements difficult to read, difficult to interpret, and there's a level of what is called functional illiteracy in many organizations, that people find it just difficult to read things and then make choices from it. And in this case, it leads to a lot of error responding. In SafeMap, we have overcome this problem. And here's what we have done. We've developed a group survey technique using electronic transponders linked to a laptop. So people sit in a room, they are being read statements on the laptop with our software, and they simply press buttons on statements they agree with. On statements they don't agree with, they just do nothing. And so they don't have to read anything, and here's the important point. It is an intuitive, quick response. There's no time to think. We want to know what goes on in Daryl's head the moment before he steps on that bulge in the carpet. We do not want to know what he thinks before he starts the job. This methodology gives us exactly that insight. In some cases, when it's impossible to have people doing group surveys, you may have small groups of people in a far location, we use web surveys, but then we add a timed response to it. I'll show you in a moment what it looks like. And we can also use QR codes to do the same thing. People can access a survey on their cell phone, simply pointing their cameras to a QR code, and they can do the survey with timed responses. Now, our main technology is group surveys and electronic responses because they actually eliminate most of these biases and they minimize error. It gives people single, simple lines of responses. It's a timed response, and people intuitively react to the question at hand. This is a very significant advancement on culture analysis, and I do contend that this is the only way in which you can actually survey culture in an organization. So our technology is actually unequaled. We have developed this over many years, and what we will do for an organization is we will create a combination of these options to conduct a survey with, and most of that survey ideally will be done with option 1. You can actually point your camera to that QR code on the screen now, and you will see that it opens up a questionnaire, and you can go through it, and it shows you how the time responses work. I will not go through that at this stage. You can do that on your own. Just to re-emphasize the value of this kind of surveying technology. When you look at an onion, what you see from an onion is the outer ring, the skin. It is a tasteless, dead skin layer over the onion. It is not the onion. Now, I contend that if you conduct surveys with these outdated, inferior techniques, you will think that your culture is actually that red skin. And what you will never know is what is the depth and layer content of a culture. That onion consists of a number of rings, and right at the center of that ring is how we deal with threat. And we have a variety of things we need to understand how we deal with threat. What is the commitment to safety? What is the trust and alignment? The engagement in decisions? Response to failure? How do we apply rules in the organization? How do teams respond to risk? And what kind of internal pressures exist? I've shown you this in our model. Now, if you just make one more slice of that layer vertically down, you actually see the other side of that coin is opportunity. And this is a very important aspect because we understand that the difference between threat and opportunity, the combination is called risk. But the difference between them is how we can deal with in terms of culture. Now, our model that I showed you earlier on has got the upstream scales, organization, leadership, and processes. That impacts on a variety of attitudes. That influences the way rules and tasks are applied and executed in the organization. Now, all of this is focusing on centrally what is the level of risk influences in the organization. And we have some very precise measurements of that. It tells you and quantifies what those influences amount to in your organization. Right, you've done the survey. You've been given this major report, and I'll show you just how in-depth that can be. When you execute a survey project like this, at the startup level, we design the process for the organization. We make clear what kind of decisions you need to make in terms of the methodologies and how this will be deployed. Then we prepare the process, and this is where sampling comes into play, that we adequately sample the organization so that all the levels and departments are represented. Now, if you look at these so-called stratified samples, where every level and every department is represented, you'll find that you come to about 65 to 75% of people that you need to survey in order to make conclusions about all those levels. But there's another advantage. The more people participate in the survey, the more you've actually already triggered the engagement of people in the design and change program that you have in mind. So it's a very important step. Then you initiate the program, and this is where we set up the various platforms in terms of surveys, how the surveys will be conducted, where they will be conducted, and how they will be executed. And then you deploy it. There is an announcement and there's communication that needs to go out to employees about the survey and its intention. We have templates that we can help you with on this. And then we monitor the execution of the surveys. Now, either we conduct the surveys for you with our consultants, or you can actually be trained by us to conduct these surveys yourselves with our kits and techniques that we train you in and provide you the software to do that with. When you conclude the survey, it is when we have completed the analysis and we've given you the report, and the report is compiled around those 13 key indicators I spoke about earlier on. And we can show a very precise analysis of the organization in terms of dissection of data by production department, by plant engineering or whatever, by job levels, And we can have a very clear indicator for you of all those aspects. You can see, for instance, supervisors in engineering and in services don't look too good, very negative. The service department lacks responses. The services department is more negative than other departments. The plant at contract and operator level, similarly so. And the production department, in this case, very positive. We can have a very precise picture for you in terms of how your organization is dissected in terms of cultural responses at every level, every department. This is a level. Now, if you look at changing the organization, there are 6 areas in which change must happen. This is the science of transformation. And each of those have got a very particular focus. At the vision level, the organization will want to review its vision. You will want to review how you want to change the intent in your organization and what you want to achieve. In order to do that, you're going to have to also change your approach or your strategies in the organization, and we call that resetting the strategies. Very importantly, the leadership behaviors and actions, practices, need to be realigned to the reset strategies, to the review of the vision. And this is where most change happens in an organization. What then follows is, how do we change processes? How do we change systems? And how do we change competence of people in the organization? And the overall change program is built around these 6 steps. They come together in a report to show how this can be your journey of change and progress in your organization in safety. Now, here's a list of many organizations that participated in our transformation processes in various ways, in various aspects. One of them is a company called Southern Company. And I want to just show you what one of their executives has said at a conference about their engagement of SafeMap to conduct this cultural analysis and to assist them with the transformation process.
All right, now you've heard a lot over the last couple of days about Southern's safety journey. We are transforming. We may not even know everything that we need to know and be making that complete transformation in exactly the right way, but we knew we needed more assistance and more knowledge. And I'm thankful the rest of our safety team for putting together a process and saying the first thing we really need to do is understand our safety culture. And they reviewed the expertise and experiences of several groups, and we ended up hiring SafeMap. And you have all had the opportunity to spend some time now with Corey Pitzer, who has changed our world. And we want to share him with you in terms of, again, sharing with you some of the learning and along the journey that we've been on. The experiences, the processes that are critical for us continuing to move forward to become not just a very good safety culture, but a great, resilient safety culture. And we had actually just sort of executed an employee survey last fall, and over 25,000 of our employees. So that was terrific. People care. People wanted to weigh in. People wanted to be heard. And a lot of what we heard, our focus on Target Zero had become a negative, not a positive. It had created an environment where people were fearful. There was a lot of peer pressure. We celebrated these strings of Target Zero, days, weeks, months. We're very proud of that. But the fact was that we created an environment where people got hurt and kept it to themselves because they didn't want to be the one to break the winning streak. We changed our entire pay structure around. And in fact, a pay goal this year for Southern is that all of its executives will go through a training process with Corey Pitzer and his team. And that has been remarkable. We all have to get on the same page. We all have to use the same vocabulary. We all need to understand some of the principles that we have held near for years, maybe decades, don't work anymore. And I just leave you with my most heartfelt thank you for your commitment, for your time, for your efforts, and for your partnership. Thank you.
That's one organization that succeeded dramatically in shifting and transforming its culture in their organization. Now, I showed you the model of what I call the onion model, and each of these layers in an organization can be changed by using the SafeMap interventions. First of all, the culture is analyzed and precisely detailed and dissected for you in our culture analysis process. The change process then starts after that. And to change that, the organization can employ us to conduct what we call safe execs. This is where the executive level of the organization come together and they review the strategies of the organization, they review the vision of the organization, and they check how the safety intent is to be changed and how the strategies are to be reset for that. This is followed by our intervention called the Safe Leader Program, and this is where we align the practices of leaders to the changed intent. The so-called Safe Cruise concept is where we look at safety processes at the front end of the business, and the risk delta is a process that re-engineers the safety and risk systems in the organization. Our final intervention is called Safe Minds, and this is aimed at the front line of the organization, where we create competence of people in the dealing and management of risk in their immediate environments. They are trained in advanced risk skills, and through this competence that we create in the organization, and this is the final conclusion of such a transformation process, is to create competence in the organization so that we can effectively unlock the opportunities in that business. On this pathway, there are various aspects that we deploy, as I just showed, but one of the important steps I haven't talked about yet, and that is after the culture has been analyzed and dissected and defined, we go into a design process with the organization. We sit down with people inside the organization through a series of workshops, and with them, we design the content and direction for the rest of the organization in terms of those interventions, so that when we deploy these interventions, they're absolutely integrated as your interventions in the organization and not SafeMap's interventions. So what is the value and focus of the SafeMap change process that we call PRISMA? It is safety culture science, and I can't emphasize this enough. There is a science in the measurement and analysis of culture. It is not as simple as slamming together a cultural survey using SurveyMonkey or any other low level of survey of opinions. We have to ensure through the methodology of surveys that the reliability and validity is unquestionable, and the SafeMap surveys can actually guarantee that. We do deep level diagnostics. We don't just give you a range of perceptions and percentages and how they look in terms of this question and that question. It is useless information. The information needs to be interpreted and shown against benchmarks, and then an in-depth diagnostic made from it all. And that is where those key cultural indicators are very important. Everything revolves around that. It leaves you with leverageable actions to take in your organization to change. Finally, it is about the science of transformation. Transformation is a scientific process. It is not just a process that you take on board and go on a journey of change. You have to design it, execute it, and measure it as you go forward. This is the SafeMap guarantee, that we can provide our clients with this expertise that we've built up over many, many years.